People always ask me, they'll say, well, why'd you change the name? I said, well, save Vitro and Amplifon, save consistency if you still have that.
That's a great question. We get the name all the time, and no, we are not a base-based organization.
Proprietary software that can help map the entire land area that we're looking at to basically look and see where the issues may be quicker, faster, and safer.
This is the Oil and Gas Contractors Connect podcast with your host, Ryan Ray.
Welcome to another edition of the Oil and Gas Contractors Connect. I'm your host, Ryan Ray, as always, and if you want to connect with me, please do so by checking out the show notes and hitting me up on LinkedIn. Nate will link to my profile there. This show, as always, is sponsored by R Square Global. If you're looking for engineering, surveying, GIS services, R Square Global is the spot to go. You can find them at gor2.com or give them a call, 318-323-6900. And if you're new to the show, this show is where we connect you with folks all across the industry, upstream, midstream, downstream, wherever you're at in the oil and gas industry. This show will introduce you to the people who are working all across the sectors that we see when we talk about oil and gas. Today we have on Gary Simpson, who is currently a petrophysical consultant with more than 40 years of industry experience. He received a BS degree from Texas A&M University in 1978. Following graduation, he began his career with Halliburton Energy Services as a wireline logging engineer, logging wells for the first Austin Chalk play. During his time at Halliburton, he held multiple positions, including field engineering, sales, technical marketing, interpretation development, petrophysics, and global production product champion for pulse neutron and carbon oxygen logging. Gary, I don't know what all we're getting into today, but that was pretty impressive. That one sentence there. I could keep on going. For the past 14 years, he's worked for companies like Shell, Burlington Resources, ConocoPhillips, Forest Oil, Hess. He's currently with
Brahman.
Sorry, I drew a blank there. I was looking at my sheet. He's currently with Brahman Resources and is also a SPWLA distinguished speaker. Has co-authored more than 20 technical papers and publications. He's an active member in industry technical societies such as the SPWLA, SPE, SCA, AAPG, and HGS. Gary, you are all over the industry. Thank you for joining us today. How's it going, sir?
It's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, so we covered a pretty lengthy bio there. Why don't you kind of break down, maybe more layman's terms, who are you and what do you do? Where do you fit in the industry? For folks like me who are not as sophisticated as someone like yourself.
Well, so I've been working. I'm approaching coming up 41 years now in the industry, and I started out actually. In Bryan College Station there. I moved out of the dorm at Texas A&M into an apartment and started my career as with Wellex was the name of the company back then, which was owned by Halliburton as the wireline logging part. And that was back before we even had computers in logging trucks. So that was what we call an analog truck. And so I spent about 25, 26 years total in the service end. Most of the portion of that was with Halliburton, and then I worked for a couple of other small wireline companies, Computalog and Perfilog. Neither one of those companies are around now, but Computalog is now part of Weatherford, and the Perfilog is actually now part of Schlumberger. But
So you say that you're a petrophysical consultant. For folks who aren't familiar with, what that is, A, the discipline, and B, what kind of practical applications that you might be employed to do, kind of break that down for us.
Well, a petrophysicist is a person in a oil company who interprets the logging measurements that are made on wells, and so these measurements are important to determining where the oil and gas is located, and also establishing what are the petrophysical properties of the reservoir, such as how porous it is, how much frosty, how much hydrocarbon is in it, how much water's in there, and then we also try to figure out, what are the mineralogies of the reservoir. reservoir, whether it's sandstone, limestone, dolomite, or if it's a big mixture. And what you find is that petrophysicists interact with almost every other discipline within an oil company. A lot of times they lump us in as geoscientists, and we work with the geologists to provide that data. But throughout my career, I've worked with reservoir engineers, drilling engineers, production engineers, the geophysicists, and just every aspect of the company. And so we reach out and touch and give different types of data to different functionalities within operating companies. And but petrophysics is, I guess one of the definitions of it is the physics of petroleum log measurements. And that's something a lot of people don't really understand. Some people have the term petrophysicist as their title, but it's truly understanding the physics of the measurements and the physics of how the different logging tools interact with the reservoir and the different types of measurements we have there.
Okay, so I got into the business in 2005, so 14 years, I guess, roughly around the time of this recording, and the industry has, changed radically since I've been in it. You said you've been in it for 40 years. Go back, just kind of at a high level, what are some of the things from your standpoint that have changed for the good and for the bad, maybe if there is, in your job? And, so because we have a lot of young listeners and some older listeners as well, but, someone who's been in the industry as long as you have, obviously you've lived through upturns and downturns and shell revolutions and wars and all kinds of stuff. How has your role changed? What are some things maybe you're doing now that you thought you'd never have done? Or what are some things that maybe you thought eventually, in the future we'll be doing this, and it just hasn't developed yet because of the technology's not there, or it just didn't pan out like you thought it would be?
Well, when I first started out, I said, we worked on what we called an analog truck. And analog truck, you walk into that truck and we had what we call a camera. It was a big camera that sat kind of in the middle of the rack that you actually recorded your logs onto film. And if you didn't get those logs recorded onto film correctly the first time, you had to totally relog the well. It's not like it is nowadays where we have computer and recording stuff digitally that we can go back and replay and rescale and do things. You had to do things on the fly there. And I actually had logging tools that had photo multiplier tubes in them. This is some of the tools we had back then didn't have transistors and the modern electronics we have now. And but about 2 years into my career, going into that, we first had what we call digital taping unit that allowed us to hook that digital taping unit into the analog unit, and then we were able to record log measurements with the taping unit and play them back to different types of plotters and stuff like that. And then the next thing, I actually got the first computer logging truck for WellX in the South Texas area, and that we graduated from having this big, massive camera to two small, about 7-inch high boxes that were fiber optics graphics recorders. And that was a big change because the film, when we recorded stuff on the film, we actually had to develop it out like you do pictures. There wasn't no little disc that you put in, or card you put into a camera. Nowadays you had to develop the film out, and these were 150-foot rolls of film that were 9 inches wide. And so having that digital graphics recorder really made things a lot easier and better. You were asking about the technologies that really changed, and some of the technologies that actually helped us, and the thing that kind of helped our industry was one, the space industry, and going to the moon a lot of the electronic components were developed, and some of the computer technology, early computer technology was developed back then. But the other thing was the Cold War with Russia. A lot of our components being able to go to high temperatures and high pressures came about by the Cold War having military spec components. And so having those types of electronics available to us as an industry really helped. And so that's one thing a lot of people don't really realize. But when the Cold War started going away, there wasn't as much work on the military deal. But you look at just going from how we design logging tools and the way they are nowadays, our old logging tools are probably about at least three times longer than the set of logging tools we put in the hole nowadays. And the electronics are all these, surface mounted. It's just, it's come along tremendously over the last 40 years as to how that's all done. And that's all about making more accurate measurements of the reservoirs to better understand what their properties are.
One of the things you hear younger folks say is that the industry is slow to adapt technology. In your experience, do you think that's true, or do you think it's overstated? I've heard some arguments for maybe why the industry is slow to adapt it, if it is true. But curious your perspective as someone who's kind of been there and kind of seen these different iterations. Is that something that our industry struggles with, or do you think that we're probably actually deploying technology at the right pace relative to the stakes that are on the line?
That's a great question, Ryan. Throughout my career, I've heard the term, well, that's the way we've always done it, and that's the way we'll always do it, and I have never subscribed to that. I've always been that hey, there may be a better way of doing something. It may not be the way you've always done it, but we need to look at, see if there's something that can improve our efficiency and things like that. So I've always been a person who's tried to seek out the latest technologies and all, but I would say that sometimes there's been resistance, but the thing that kind of slows it down a lot of times is really safety. You don't want to go out there and apply some technology that could eventually, end up hurting somebody or sending somebody not going home at the end of the day, And so you have to respect that part of it. But, the technology I've seen back in the 80s when we first started, or early 90s when we first started doing horizontal drilling, that was all new. And we've come strides in that. It used to take forever to drill a horizontal well. When I was at Hess, we got down to where we were drilling Bakken wells in less than 15 days. And I think they're probably even shorter than that. We were drilling a 10,000-foot lateral in 72 hours. And that's back in the 90s and all. That was unheard of to drill a well like that. And you think about that technology, and when it came along, if that technology had come along earlier, you think of all these a lot of these conventional reservoirs, especially stuff out in the Permian where they drilled tens and thousands of wells. You fly over that, you just see dots of wells everywhere. Right. You probably could have drilled that with a fraction of the wells they did using horizontal technology and hydraulic fracturing techniques that we use nowadays.
Yeah, and one of the things you mentioned there is, about maybe this resistance, and there's also the safety angle. I've talked to several people in the last, month or two about various technologies and new ideas, and it feels like sometimes if you just go to the tech industry itself, so not anything to oil and gas. Tech comes out with a lot of ideas, and a lot of tech companies fail, and that's because tech companies, on some level, they have a good idea, or they think it's a good idea, and they send it out to the wild, and then the wild goes, you know what, we don't like that, and it goes under. if you take that in oil and gas, as you mentioned, there's a inherent safety risk because you just can't send something down a hole without understanding it. But two, it feels like the tech companies, when they come into oil and gas, would be better served by partnering with service companies or consultants and let the R&D process, as much as it can be filtered out with a service company or a small operator, instead of trying to develop the technology and then send it out to the marketplace and let the marketplace respond, because there's not a lot of room for error. Whereas if you build some tech platform or whatever, and if it doesn't work, okay, that's not the end of the world. Would you agree with that, or do you have a different take on how the technology is being rolled out here in the oil and gas?
Well, sometimes it's the new people on the block and that come up with this stuff. And if somebody was to take that technology directly to a company, it would probably run into it was a not invented here scenario, and they probably wouldn't look at it as closely as if somebody was to go out there and develop it and get it going a little bit and prove up the technology for them. But it's I've seen that in the past, and typically what happens is the company gets up there and they start something up, and then they eventually get bought up by the larger companies. And Halliburton and Schlumberger and Baker, they've done a lot of that in the past. Look at all the different arms of Schlumberger and all the different arms. Schlumberger's original deal, they were a logging company. Halliburton, they were a cementing company. Now they span the whole spectrum of a lot of the technologies that we have in the industry, and that's because they've acquired different technologies over time.
So you mentioned that you've kind of worked on a lot of different, obviously 40 years, so a lot of time, but also a lot of different areas of the United States, and the role and the functionalities kind of changed. One of the questions we try to ask all of our guests is, when you're dealing with, and you probably have a different take on this, I'm curious your take is, we try to ask all of our guests, what's the one thing that you try to advise your client that might be a small issue early on? It seems like a small issue early on, but if you don't fix it, it becomes a big issue. So do you have something like that when you're working with producers, or maybe it is service companies, say, hey guys, this seems like it's a small issue now, but if we don't take care of this, 6 months, 3 months, a year down the road, it will become a massive issue for us.
Well, I think that's one of the advantages that a more seasoned industry person like myself or anybody else that's a consultant offers, especially to the small companies as a contractor role, that if we see something, then we can make a recommendation right away to do something. And I will tell you that hopefully there's my cat in the background. I hope you don't hear that. But anyway, that it's like for the Brahman Resources, we were in the process of completing the heel half of a well. We took over from another company that had done the toe half, and the first 3 or 4 stages that we were trying to do the hydraulic fracture on were just dismal. Of course, equipment was breaking down. We weren't getting our sand put away. We weren't pumping. We weren't getting to completion, and we couldn't get it started back up. And as I started looking at it and talking about, okay, what type of perforating gun are we using? And come to find out, we were using a DP perforating system and a deep penetrating. Well, a deep penetrating system and horizontal well is probably not the best thing to use and out there. And so what happens is when that gun's laying on the bottom side of the hole, the perforations that are on the top and to the sides are probably just pinholes. And so you have a lot of perforation friction when that happens, and you're not putting away you're not able to put away the sand through those small holes that you have. And so first thing I did is recommend, hey, let's go with what's called a good hole charge. And a good hole charge is designed such that all the perforation diameters are the same all the way around the wellbore, whether the guns land on the bottom or it perforates the top of the hole. And when you're doing hydraulic fracturing, you don't really have to have a perforation that goes 30 inches deep. You just need something that gets through the casing so that you can initiate a fracture in your reservoir. Along with that, I reckon, because we were having high treating pressures of 0.91 psi per foot, right? And so that was our frac gradient. So I recommended that we try a perforating system called the Kodiak system, which has these wafers of rocket fuel put inside the carrier along with the perforating charges. And so that system, you put your your good hole charges in there, it perforates, and then these wafers of rocket fuel ignite slower than the perforations. And it's like hitting the reservoir with a huge sledgehammer. And that kind of fractures the reservoir, pre-fractures it. And it may be from a few inches out to 60 or 70 feet, but we lowered our frac initiation from 0.91 down to 0.72. And that was just my experience of being able to recommend that. And that's what an experienced contractor, regardless of whether they're a petrophysicist or production engineer or completions engineer or whatever, can offer to some of these smaller companies.
Yeah, that's good to know. That's interesting. So let's, I guess, get ready to land the plane here, if you will. Anything that we didn't hit on today that you wanted to mention or talk about before we let you off the hook?
Well, you would think after almost 41 years in the industry that I might be wanting to retire or do something like that. That's not even in my sights right now. I have really enjoyed myself over the last few years. I'm sorry my time at Hess came to an end. I was in a global group there that allowed us to look at technologies for unconventionals, but just trying to understand what's going on with these unconventionals has just really kind of excited me and made it more interesting here at the end of my career. I never would have thought that I would be involved in something like this and trying to understand things. There's still conventional reservoirs we don't understand everything about.
Right.
And to think that we can take what we know about conventional reservoirs and apply it to unconventionals is just not practical. So being able to find out, and I used to say all the time, I wish I knew what I don't know, then that's what I could work on today. And but there's so much that we just don't know yet, and we still have to learn. And so if I could give any advice to young professionals out there who've been in the industry a few years, just never quit learning and never quit looking at new technology and new ways of doing stuff. And
and that's a great point, because we'll read every year, it seems like, insert location, place, name here, company has found new way to get more oil out of it, or whatever the case may be. It seems like there's always some headline where the reserves were depleted, they thought, or they were, the field was past its prime, and now they're getting maybe not the old levels, but the levels are rising or changing, or whatever the case may be. So it's there's still a lot that we don't know about this industry that we're in, and a lot to learn, which is exciting for folks who are new and upcomers, if you will, because they don't have a lot of work to be done still.
Well, I still think that, while there's been so much of a big focus on the unconventionals, that people need to go back and look at some of these conventional fields and look maybe how they can apply some new technologies to get more out of them. And I always say, where do you find oil and gas? Where you found it before? If these are the source rocks and stuff like that, but but being able to go in and some of these fields, I saw a deal here recently where some people that they were drilling 2,000-foot horizontal wells in a 2 Darcy reservoir. This reservoir was real susceptible to having coning, but because they were drilling in the upper part of the reservoir, which was a lower quality part of it, it kind of acted as a filter to reduce the coning effect, and they were producing 2,000 barrels a day out of a 2,000-foot well or something. If you were to drill a vertical well, maybe only a couple 100 or 200 barrels a day, and probably about 1,000 barrels of water. But anyway,
well, Gary,
there's opportunities out there.
That's exactly right. And Gary, we're going to link your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Is there anywhere else that you'd want people, if they want to connect with you, have questions or comments besides LinkedIn, to push them towards?
No, they can find my contact information on LinkedIn, and all they have to do is click on that contact info stuff. I think I have my phone number and email address on there, and yeah, it's fine.
Okay, great. We will be sure to link to that in the show notes. Be sure to connect with Gary if you have questions, comments, or hey, he's a consultant, so I'm sure at some point he might be willing to do some consulting work, because that's what consultants do, I believe, Gary, right?
Oh yeah, it's I've heard some people are having some trouble, having a little bit hard time getting the consulting deal, but companies need to realize that they can they may get more out of what they end up paying for a consultant just from the information that consultant has.
That's right. Okay, Gary, thank you so much for coming on. And to the listeners, thank you so much for coming on, and we will talk to you next time on Oil and Gas Contractors Connect. And until then, keep climbing.